episode 36. Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host as we listen to eyewitness encounters involving one of the most terrifying cryptids, dogmen. Before we bring on tonight's guest, I received 2 encounters I'm going to read for you. The first encounter reads, "Before I tell you the story, you need to know that my encounter happened when I was 12. I was born and raised in Dallas, Texas, so I'm pretty used to city life. I was always fascinated by cryptids, Bigfoot the most, but as time passed, I forgot all about it and moved on. My family and I would go on camping vacations in which we would camp in the woods for about a week or so. I remember not being afraid at all, as the nearest highway was less than a mile away. 4 to 5 cars were passing by every minute on it. I would always hear strange noises coming from the woods, but there was always a natural explanation for them. Raccoons and squirrels were always in and around the camping spot. Occasionally they'd get into our tents in search of food. One summer we stopped going. I had no idea why. I asked my dad about it, and he said that it was getting to be too dangerous. I just went along with it and carried on. I found it strange that he said that, so I went online with all of my 10-year-old vocabulary's might and tried to find any animals that lived in the woods that could kill a human. The only ones I found were venomous spiders and coyotes. Figuring that it would only be a couple of months until our next trip, I shrugged it off. Funny thing is, it would be another 2 years until we went back into the woods. The day came, we were all suited up and driving miles into the woods with some of my uncles. When we arrived, nothing in the camping spot had changed except for the rust covering the benches and spiderwebs all around a small shed which housed a bathroom. Everything was going well. My uncles were having a barbecue. My parents were with them laughing and telling jokes, and I was on the edge of a small pond playing with the sand and throwing rocks into the water. That's where it first happened. I was drawing with a stick in the sand when I noticed shrubs moving across the pond from me. I thought it must have been an animal, but then the shrubs moved again. That was when I noticed a black shape behind the shrubs hiding in the cottontails. It wasn't moving. That automatically made me scared. I leaned to my side to see more of it. That's when I saw its entire body. It was extremely muscular. I couldn't see its face as the shadow of its own body was blocking its face from my sight. I was petrified. That's when my fight-or-flight instincts kicked in. Being a 140-pound 12-year-old, I ran as fast as I could back to the camping spot. By then, I was crying and screaming. All heads turned towards me. My mom ran toward me and hugged me. She asked me what was going on. I just kept screaming, "We have to go, we have to go." Mom, being oblivious, calmed me down and told me to behave. As time passed, I was calm but still scared. I was trying to figure out what I had seen. I was trying to decide if it had been a common animal I had simply misidentified, but the only animal I could think of was Bigfoot. That's when I noticed the look on my dad's face. He looked worried to death and was constantly glancing at the tree line. I knew he knew why I was so scared. That night, everyone was asleep in their tents except me. It was a moonlit night. The crickets were making noise as well as the frogs and toads. It was about 11 p.m. when all the sounds of the forest went silent. It was so quiet I could hear my uncle snoring in the tent beside us. I knew something was wrong. A couple of seconds later, I heard faint footsteps coming from the tree line. The footsteps got closer and closer to the point where it was right in front of our tent. It was casting a shadow over the tent. That's how I was able to see the entire silhouette of it. One thing that awed me was how tall it was. It was at least 6 or 7 feet tall. That's when I saw something twitch on the top of its head. It had canine ears. I instantly knew it wasn't a Bigfoot. I was petrified again. I didn't want to make a sound, so I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. The next morning, oddly enough, I woke up in the car. We were going home. We had all heard and seen it. My parents never spoke of it again. Signed, Michael Raw. The next encounter was received from Joe Schaefer. This encounter reads, I'm an Aboriginal person from the Cree tribe up in Canada's Northwest Territories. I come from a family of hunters and trappers and am familiar with all the animals in our region, or so I thought. I've been hunting in the forest alone since I was 10 years old. It was nothing for me to pick up my grandfather's double-barreled .410 shotgun and be gone all day hunting for small game, never giving a second thought to the dangers that may have been lurking out there. It was in the spring of 2002 when my second oldest son and I went hunting ducks at a location approximately 25 miles northeast of our community, at a place known to us as the Foxholes. It's a very large swampy prairie area that goes on for miles and miles. It's an excellent habitat for waterfowl, and they usually congregate there in great numbers during the spring migration. The day we went hunting, my son and I were the only two hunters in the area. That was probably because it was a weekday and most people were working. I pulled my son out of school for the day so that he could come with me. It was about 11 a.m. when we arrived on site. It was clear and sunny with a mild breeze blowing from the north. We each proceeded to build a duck blind. My son set up his duck blind about a quarter mile away from me near a little pond facing the opposite direction to where I was. We hunted all afternoon and into the evening when suddenly we heard a very loud howling. The hairs on the back of my neck immediately stood up. I got up and looked in the direction the sound was coming from. It was coming from a nearby tree line directly behind us, about half-mile away. This howling was like nothing I had ever heard before, and it wasn't coming from any animal I recognized. I looked over to where my son was and saw that he was out of his blind and on his way over to me. When he got to where I was, he asked me, what was that howling? I said that I didn't know. We stood around looking at the tree line for a bit and then decided to pack up and leave for home. We didn't say much on the way home other than trying to guess what kind of creature was howling back along the tree line. We didn't know. A couple of days later, I asked an old friend of mine if he had ever heard this kind of howling. I imitated the sound as best I could for him. He said that last year on one of his canoeing trips down a secluded creek, he and this other fellow he was with heard something exactly like that. They were getting ready to bed down for the night in their tent along the creek when they heard the howl. He estimated that it was fairly close to them, but it was difficult for him to judge distance in the thick forest. He had never heard anything like that before either and couldn't connect it to any animal that he knew of. In conclusion, I have never heard that kind of howl before, and I haven't heard that kind of howl since. Whether it was a dogman or not is anyone's guess, but I'm not ruling it out. Anything's possible. We have miles and miles of forested area in the north where nobody has ever been, and any creature such as dogman or Sasquatch can easily stay hidden, forever if it so chooses. Thanks for sending that story in, Joe. I appreciate it. There's one last thing I want to share with you before I bring Kumbo on. If you have any question or questions for me, it's easy to reach me and ask those questions in the chat room every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. If you go to dogmanencountersradio.com/chat room, you'll see how you can log in. To join us in the chat and ask your question, it's really easy. All you have to do is either use your Facebook account to log into the chat, or if you go to chatwing.com, it only takes seconds to register and get your own account. Tonight's guest is Tim Kumbo Baker. Kumbo, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Glad to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you. Before we go any further, I want to clarify something for the listeners. There are quite a few people that listen to this show that don't listen to Bigfoot-based shows, so they probably haven't heard you do a show before to know what the term booger refers to. So you all know the term booger refers to a Bigfoot. That's just a term that Kumbo and Bear, who hopefully will be a guest on an upcoming show, that's how they refer to Bigfoot.
I had been hearing about the creature that we know as Bigfoot for decades before I ever heard the word Bigfoot. The first word that I ever heard used in reference to a Bigfoot was catamount. That's what my grandfather and my dad called them, was catamounts. People may doubt this, but I remember it very, very clearly when I was 3 years old. At that point, I was beginning to wander around some on the farm, and and I would walk. Even at that young age, I would walk about a little over a quarter of a mile by myself from our house over to my grandparents' house. And I was starting to, piddle around and stuff outside. And my grandfather took me back to a tree that was up on a ridge out east of their house. And he told me, he said, "Boy, you see that tree right there?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Those catamounts sit up in that tree and watch us. They watch the house. And when I come back here, they jump down out of that tree and they run off down in that holler right there." Well, a holler is like a draw or a little small valley. And I remember, I said, "Well, what's a catamount?" He said, "Well, that's a good question. It's sort of like a cross between like a bear and a monkey." And I thought, I really didn't know what to think about it. Well, sometime later on, my dad was talking about catamounts. I said, "Daddy, what's a catamount?" He said, "Well, it's sort of like cross between maybe a bear and a monkey with possibly some little bit of cat mixed in it or something, because it can climb like a cat, but bears can climb too. So I don't know, but but then the neighbors would call them boogers, and then some of them would call them haints, some of them would call them wild men, some of them hairy men, and some of them would call them no-heads. And as a matter of fact, there's a holler that goes up onto the corner of our farm called No-Head Holler, or No-Head Hollow. And there's a road down there to this day right now called No-Head Hollow Road. If you look on a topo map right now to this day, and you find No-Head Hollow and follow it out to the southeast, and you go up over a shallow, a low sort of a rise, some people might call it a ridge, but it's really not much of a ridge. But then it goes down into a creek bottom out on the south of that. And that creek bottom is called Booger Bottom, because it's got boogers in it. They pass through there periodically. They migrate from out to the south around Bankhead National Forest. They stay there during the summertime, and in the early fall they migrate to the northward up along the Tennessee River. And they pass through Booger Bottom on the way. And they hang around along the river till about April, and then migrate back to the south into the Bankhead National Forest.
That's something. I never knew there was a road named like that.
Yeah, there sure is. I can send you a picture of it. The road sign, No-Head Hollow. No-Head Hollow Road.
That's pretty good. I never knew about that.
Yeah.
Please give us a brief bio on yourself.
I was born and raised in northwest Alabama in the Muscle Shoals area, and lived on a farm out east of Muscle Shoals the first several years of my life. And while out on that farm, as I was a young kid, I became aware that there were some kind of boogers or haints or catamounts or no-heads or something that lived out there on the farm. Didn't really think that much of them at the time, although, I heard them and I heard people talking about them. Got up in high school. Some years later, one of the guys that I went to high school with had an encounter. He and his brother were very shaken up by it. They told about it at school, and he was ridiculed extremely. So I learned then that best to keep my mouth shut about the things that I had seen and heard of out on our farm. Then went off to college and didn't really think much of it. Went to Auburn University, got out in 1978, started working for a electrical engineering department of a utility company, and spent several years doing that. Sort of got back into things concerning Bigfoot because of some incidents that I had out on the farm when I moved back out there. Suddenly things that I hadn't thought about in years and years and years, I started thinking about again because I started hearing some of the same things and seeing some of the same things. And the year before I got married, had my first fairly close-up encounter with one. Didn't actually see it. I could tell where it was because it was shaking trees and, saplings and stuff at me while it was screaming. I could hear it stomping back and forth. That report some years later actually wrote it up, and it's on the BFRO website. You can read about it. And just about 1 year later, this is after I had gotten married. I'd been married about a few months, and we were living out on the farm. We had an encounter where I actually saw it for the first time clearly. It scared my wife half to death, my wife at the time. And exactly 1 week later, we were no longer living on the farm. We moved to Huntsville, Alabama, and went to work for a government contractor in Huntsville and started traveling a lot for the government over the next several years. And, I hadn't really planned on doing Bigfoot research in other places, but sometimes I would get stuck there on TDY for sometimes weeks at a time. Well, I never was one to waste a lot of money going to nightclubs and stuff like that, so in my free time I would be out in the boonies somewhere, rooting around. And I ended up hearing about Bigfoot stories and stuff, and sightings and things, just sort of accidentally. I realized here's an opportunity that I can do research in areas that I would normally never be able to get to go to, both on government installations and in the areas around them. So I researched Bigfoot very extensively all over the country for quite a number of years just by myself. And I had a couple of work buddies that were interested in it too. And sometimes if we were on TDY together, we would go out together. But the majority of it was by myself. That went on all through the 1980s and the 1990s, and I had no idea that there was any kind of interest about Bigfoot on the internet. Of course, when I first got started, the internet wasn't even in existence, but I started working with the government's version of the internet back in the mid-80s, and wasn't really interested in getting on it very much from the recreational aspect of it. I had to use it at work all the time. Some years later, a good friend of mine in the Bigfoot world, his handle is Bubba Gump. He and I had done some investigating together. We'd done a lot of talking about it over the years, and he was been a friend of mine since back in the 70s, and had spent a lot of time out at our farm with me, and had, seen and heard stuff. We had hunted together a lot. Anyway, he got to talking to me about other Bigfoot researchers on the internet. So one day over at his house, he got to showing me some stuff. The BFRO was in its infancy then, and he said, "Ben, you need to write up some of the sightings that you've had. You need to write some reports." So I did. I wrote up a couple, 3 of them, and talked to some of them, and talked to one of their, experts, and I was sort of let down because I thought I'd learned something from them, but no, they were asking me a bunch of stuff. I expressed interest in learning more from them. They didn't seem too open. Later on, I heard about, from my friend, another Bigfoot research organization. I posted one of my sightings on their website. They contacted me, and lo and behold, this guy from Mississippi called me up one day, and it turned out to be the guy who is now my friend, Bear. And that's how he was introduced to me. He said, "Hi, I'm Bear." Well, I'd known a few folks named Bear over the years. I was talking to him. I said, "Man, here's somebody that's just as bad a redneck as I am," because he sounded just about like me. Anyway, I talked to him a little bit. Talking to him was quite a bit different. I realized that he actually, knew something about them. We talked enough times over the phone about different things that I thought, I might actually be interested in going out in the field with this guy. He's pretty sharp. I'd like to see what he knows. And as it turned out, we had an opportunity where we could both go on an investigation on this lady's uncle's farm where they'd had some activity. So we went over there, and that was the first time that I ever was in the field with him. It didn't take me very long to figure out that he knew boogers. We hit it right off, and he and I have been running together ever since then. And that was back in around 1999-2000 time frame. Backing up somewhat, during my time with the government, I started out working in the nuclear business, working on nuclear power and propulsion equipment. We're talking about nuclear power plants and nuclear-powered ships and submarines and such. I was traveling around to, to the locations of a lot of nuclear power plants, as well as going to some places where we were doing some research on safety-related equipment that's used in nuclear plants. In '83, the commercial nuclear business in this country sort of went down the drain due to the 3 Mile Island accident. Things were sort of drying up there, so I had an opportunity to get more into the military side of the house. And while there, working on a lot of military projects, I became aware that NASA was doing some hiring. A bunch of the old engineers that had brought NASA through the Apollo days and stuff, the ones that hadn't already retired, were retiring, and NASA was hiring big time back then in the early 80s. I had always been interested in the space program. I went and interviewed, and lo and behold, they hired me. That started a whole other round of traveling, going around different parts of the country. They sent me back to school. I had to get a bunch of engineering certifications that they wanted me to have. So we were constantly going around to different places where there were various experiments and things like that being built that went on the shuttle. I worked in the Integration Operations and Test Requirements branch. We were the guys that worked with people that were wanting to fly experiments on the shuttle, and we worked with them to help them build it where it was flight-worthy, and then we tested it, and we figured out how we were going to integrate it and install it on the shuttle. And we worked with the astronauts, training them how to run the damn experiments. So I was traveling a lot. In my free time, I was out bigfooting when I could, if I wasn't in the middle of some big city somewhere. Even if I was in a big city, on the weekends, I was gone to the boonies. That went on all through the 80s and into the 90s. After the Challenger accident, I worked 7 different missions in mission control, and I was in mission control when the Challenger blew up. After the Challenger blew up, there wasn't a whole lot of work going on with NASA, but there was a tremendous amount of stuff going on with the Army Missile Command. So I just went over into the Missile Command side of the house and kept right on working, and that led into traveling a bunch, even more so than when I was with NASA. So again, I spent a lot of time out bigfooting while I was off on TDY in my free time. I know that's too long of an intro, but that's sort of the way I got into it, sort of the history of what brought me up to around the time of 1999-2000, where I started doing this with groups of people. I don't know if you call them clubs or whatever, but in sort of public organizations. But I sat down one day and I got to looking at it, where I have made over the years, and this is counting up to now, I have made dedicated trips just for Bigfoot research and investigations to 18 different states. The sole purpose I was there was just for that. I have been in that many more states, about 18 more states, on other business, and then while there, was able to take the time to go out doing Bigfoot research. So we're talking around 36 states that I have done research in, and 1 Canadian province in Ontario. That's not counting others that I have just driven through, sort of keeping my eyes and ears peeled. But I'm talking about actually been on the ground researching in 36 states and 1 Canadian province. Probably at one time, I may have been the most well-traveled Bigfoot researcher in the United States. Since then, the guys that do a lot of these TV shows and stuff, they've covered a whole lot more ground than I have. But they haven't been doing it as long as I have. I've been around.
I've got to tell you, Kumbo, if my life depended upon seeing a Bigfoot, if I had to pick 1 or 2 guys to go out with to accomplish that, you and Bear without a doubt, would be the guys that I would look up, because in my opinion, it doesn't get any better than you guys. You've been doing it so long with such good results that it's just hard to argue with that. You probably knew this, but I wanted to share this with you just in case you didn't. Did you know that it's because of you and Bear that I got into the whole Dogman research thing in the first place?
No, I didn't know that at all.
It's because of Bear that I got into podcasting, but it's because of both you and Bear that I got into this Dogman thing to start with.
I'm honored and humbled.
Well, you've inspired a lot of people, a lot more people than you'll ever know. I've been talking to people that have mentioned you, I don't know how many times.
Well, I try to tell it like it is, and I don't claim to know everything. I've just been around enough, and I've kept my eyes and ears open enough. I feel blessed that I had a father that taught me at a young age, and my mother also encouraged me as well to, really pay attention to nature, pay attention to what's going on around you, and my grandfather too. I had a really good foundation in the wild, and I was able to apply that towards something, learning more about something that was complete mystery to me through a large part of my life. And by no means do I know everything about them. No way. It seems like a lot of times the more I learn, the more questions I have. It leaves me totally scratching my head that I can't figure out. And this Dogman thing is one of them. I had heard a little bit of rumbling about them, and I got involved in an incident where I really firsthand heard about the Dogman from somebody who had actually seen one. That really has turned me on wanting to learn more about them, and they continue to be an enigma to me. And I have never seen one. I'll say that up front. Not sure that I want to see one up close.
Yeah, I can't say I blame you there. Kunbo, I've got to ask you, for the longest time, you didn't even believe in dogmen, or as I think you call them, dog-faced boogers. What made you change your mind on that?
Well, actually, I called them more like werewolves. I think it was Bear that called them. I think Bear might have been the one that called them dog-faced boogers, but I had heard them referred to as werewolves. Well, I thought it was a bunch of hooey, that it was just old wives' tales or something, the loot guru and all that. I just didn't really believe it. And as many hours and as much time as I had spent in the woods, I'd never seen one. I'd never run across anything that made me think one was out there. I had never seen any tracks that were unusual, from other Bigfoot tracks, things, something that I couldn't identify. I just didn't believe it.
I'm sure you know about all the reports out there of canine-type dogmen with the backwards-looking legs. What's your take on that?
I have seen tracks of dogmen on multiple occasions. And I have seen the tracks when I was able to talk to the people who saw the dogman. And I know enough about anatomy of different things to understand how people talk about the backward legs. They're not backwards. They're still made sort of like ours, but I think the difference is whether they're plantigrade or digitigrade or something. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. The plantigrade is more like what we have. In other words, we walk with our heels on the ground. The digitigrade is you walk with your heels off the ground. The tracks that I have seen that I know were dogman tracks were all digitigrade. You could see the ball of the foot, behind the toes. You could see the toe prints, and you could see claw marks. The first time I saw those was when I was taken to where two ladies had a sighting of one that morning. They took me there and showed me where it was. and I found the tracks. I found where the tracks went up the side of a bank. They didn't see it do that. They didn't hoax it or anything because they didn't see it make those tracks. Where it was across the road is where I found these. But it was in the direction of the line of travel that the ladies said that it was going. They had seen it come up on the east side of the road, and it stopped as they went by. So I just went across after investigating there where they saw it stop, and I looked back down the hill, and I could tell where something had come through the grass. Well, I just naturally went to the other side of the road and started looking, and I found where it had scaled the bank. That was the first time that I ever saw the tracks. I can give you more detail on that sighting later on in the interview. But later on at Land Between the Lakes, I found digitigrade tracks with claw marks on the toes. Now, there may be some out there that want plantigrade. I don't know. But I can tell you this. Look at a dog. My German Shepherd just got up and he's walking over here to me. All right. Dogs, their back legs are digitigrade. Now, as you come up from their pad, their leg goes backwards. And what looks like a backwards knee joint isn't. It's the equivalent of our ankle. And then it breaks back forward. Then their knee is up higher against their side. It's not down below them like it is on our body. So these dog men that walk digitigrade, they do not have backwards breaking knees. They have knees just like you and I, but their heel is up off the ground. And their foot may be elongated to the point that people that see one, that's going to be striking to them. That's going to stick in their mind, and they're going to think that they're seeing a backwards bent knee. That's my take on that. Now, whether there are some that walk with their heels on the ground, I don't know. I haven't seen one. I haven't investigated any reports where they mentioned that, and I was able to find the plantigrade track. I have never investigated a report where they specifically said that it walked. I mean, that's one thing that I question people about. Could you see its feet? Did it have normal-looking feet? Was its heel on the ground? You know, did it leave normal-looking tracks? And I've never had anybody answer yes to any of that. And nor have I found tracks where they said they had seen one and they were normal-looking, what you think of normal Bigfoot tracks, if there's any such thing as normal Bigfoot tracks.
Do you ever go out and specifically look for dogmen in the woods?
Yes. Yes, I have made multiple trips to Land Between the Lakes, to areas within the Land Between the Lakes where there have been dogman incidents, up to and including people being killed. And I have found tracks in one of those locations. As a matter of fact, it was quite unnerving. We camped there, believe it or not, and we had a guy that saw what he thought at the time was a regular Bigfoot easing around the edge of our camp. And he saw it pass behind Bear's tent and then come over and go behind a tree that was right next to my tent. I'm talking about within a couple of feet. Another one of my German Shepherds was in the tent with me. I spoil my dogs. I sleep on a cot in my tent, and I have a pet cot for my dog that I take with me. It's about 4 feet long and about 2.5, almost 3 feet wide, and it sits up on legs, and it's about 3-4 inches up off the ground. Gets him off the cold ground. They love them. I've got 3 or 4 of them around the house here, and they love the things. And I'll put a fold-up blanket on it, and that's where they sleep when we go camping. And anyway, so he was on his pet cot. Well, I was there sound asleep, and I woke up to my dog Buddy growling. Anybody that's owned a large dog or owned dogs for very long, there's 2 kinds of growls. There's an aggressive growl and a defensive growl. Actually, what woke me up was Buddy had gotten up off his cot, and he was getting under my cot and bumping me from below, trying to wad up under my cot, and he was growling. I rolled over, I got a hold of him, I drug him out from under my cot, put him back on his cot, told him to stay. He wouldn't do it. He got back under my cot, and he was shivering, and he was growling. And I thought, well, maybe there's something out there. So I'll just cut him some slack, let him stay there. Well, that's where he ended up staying all night. The next day, the guy that had seen this creature, he didn't see it well enough. You know, he was out, I think he'd gotten up to relieve himself or something. He said he saw just a dark shadow, you know, just a dark shape that moved down, and it passed behind Bear's tent, and it went over beside my tent and stood there behind a pretty good size, about a 2.5 foot diameter tree that was beside my tent. And he said he didn't see it after that. That he didn't know if it had sneaked away around behind my tent or if it was still hiding there, but eventually he went back in his tent, went back to sleep. All right. He was talking about it the next day, and he was telling Bear about it. I was busy with doing other things. I wasn't paying attention. I'm like, yeah, because this guy has been known to, I thought, exaggerate a little bit. Well, later that day, I was getting ready to take my tent down and pack up to head home. And I walked around there, and lo and behold, there were tracks. Very, very clear tracks right behind that tree where he said the thing was, right within 18 inches to 2 feet of the side of my tent. So I went back and I asked, I said, when did you see this? He says, oh, it was about 3:15 this morning. And I remember I had looked at my watch when Buddy was crawling under my cot, and it was about 3:15. Yeah. The tracks are very clear. It was behind the tree there for a while. I saw multiple tracks there where it had shifted around a little bit there, and then the tracks headed up the hill behind my tent, headed off sort of to the west-northwest, and disappeared up over a little ridge back behind our camp. And then we got to look at it, and Bear and them had found some tracks over behind their tent. People say that they're bloodthirsty, they want to kill you. Well, you can't say that about all of them, or maybe there was enough people in that camp that it wouldn't have done that if it had ill intent. But I can tell you this, I ain't camping in, I'm not camping in Dogman territory unless there's at least 6 or 7 of us. I've been in that area by myself multiple times in daylight hours, and I can tell you it is some more kind of spooky in there. One time we were passing through the area, and I decided to cut through the land between the lakes, and I hadn't told my wife anything about any particular part of the LBL or anything had happened. She hadn't heard any of the stories about the beast of LBL. She's never heard us talk about a dog man or anything like that. She was going in there totally blind. We came in to the southern part of the LBL and went up by the old iron furnace that's right there on the trace, which is the main drag north and, well, it's not really north and south, it's sort of southeast to northwest through the LBL, but we stopped by the old iron furnace that's right there on the trace, and we went by the buffalo field and got to see the buffaloes, and I drove her around, showed her one of the old homes that are still back there in the woods that nobody lives in anymore. We went up by the elk enclosure and saw that. Rode through there and got to see a lot of elk and everything, so I headed on up north. I went to an overlook up near the canal that connects Barkley Lake with Kentucky Lake, that connects the Cumberland River and the Tennessee River together. And we circled back around to the southwest and started down the west side there along one of the roads that follows the shoreline of Kentucky Lake there. And she started getting a little bit creepy. We came to this one place, had a beautiful view, and I couldn't get her to get out of the car. And it was broad daylight. And she said, I don't like this place. This place got a bad feeling to it. Well, we were still pretty good distance away, a few miles away from where the really bad dogman stuff had happened. So I wanted to cut from there, cut cross country back towards the trace, and I wanted to go back by the place that's referred to as the bunkers, where a dog man was supposedly killed after the incident that happened where the 4 people got killed that were camping in the RV park, in their RV. So we head out down that road, and she started getting spooked. And I hadn't said a word. And I came up to the side road that turns off that went up to where the bunkers were. And I wanted to go up in there to see them. She wouldn't go. I said, would you mind sitting here in the car and if I go? She said, you better not get out of sight of this car. And she said, don't you leave me down here. She said, this place is bad. She'd never been to a place where she felt like that before. She was totally spooked, and I hadn't said a word about anything. I mean, she had no idea of the history of the place. So we ended up, I didn't get out, didn't go anywhere, and I tried to drive through a couple of areas, and she told me, she said, just get me out of here. I don't want to see anymore. I want to get out of here. I don't like this place. So we left and headed on out, across the canal and up through Grand Rivers and, headed on home. But I was really astounded at her reaction to the place from somebody that was totally and completely oblivious to what had happened up there. So it's got a feel to it that people that don't even know what's going on can pick up on if they're perceptive at all. And I was happy. It was a beautiful day. Clear as a bell. Sun was shining. I mean, it was a gorgeous day. And I think it was in the fall, in the early fall. It was just, it was one of those days it's good to be alive, good to be out and around, She didn't like that north end of the LBL at all.
The LBL is a very creepy place. There's just something about that place that isn't right. I've got no desire to go hang out there. Before we move on with the topic of the LBL, I want to ask you, Kumbo, between dogmen and Bigfoot, or boogers as you call them, which one scares you the most?
Well, let me back up. You had asked me had I been specifically out to investigate dogmen sightings. I've been multiple times to LBL doing it. One time I was going on a trip out west, and I made a specific trip to Lake Oologah area there north of Tulsa, Oklahoma, to investigate some dogman sightings there. And I went out one time to an area there. As it turned out, they didn't tell me that there were dogmen out there, but we went out to an area out near Hitchcock, Oklahoma. You can go to Hitchcock all you want to and wander around. You'll never find this place. That was just the nearest civilization. I met the people in Hitchcock, and we went out to a place that was way out in a ranch that their family owned, way out in the sticks, and I couldn't find the place again now if my life depended on it. I'm usually really good with directions, but I could not find this place again, and I don't even know how to find it on a topo map. I don't know. I was taken out there after dark, and after we got out there, it was revealed to me that there was a whole family of werewolves that lived out there. And we actually camped out there. Yeah. And I never saw or heard a thing. Killed 2 rattlesnakes, and that was it. Never saw or heard a thing. And Bo never alerted. Bo was with me on that trip, and he never alerted, so I don't know. So I've made 3 trips, 2 that I knew ahead of time were to investigate, or I've made multiple trips to in between the lakes, but I've been to 3 different locations, 2 knowing ahead of time that we were specifically going there looking for dogmen, and this other one I got there and found out that that's what we were looking for, or what they call werewolves. But I'm sorry for interrupting. Now let's go on to the next question that you had started asking.
Between dogmen and Bigfoot, or boogers as you call them, which one are you more afraid of?
Dogmen, absolutely positively.
Why is that?
Well, I guess historically, you hear about a lot more stories of people disappearing or being killed, and it is suspected that regular Bigfoot, either type 1 or type 2, had something to do with it. But you hear less stories of killings or disappearances or whatever that are attributed to the dogmen. But the things that you do hear about the dogmen and the people that have had up-close encounters with them, they all have been way more traumatized by them than the average person that I've seen that have had up-close encounters with Bigfoot. Now, I'm not saying that there are not people that are extremely traumatized by encounters with Bigfoot, but the percentage of people that are traumatized by encounters that they've had with dogmen is a lot higher than the percentage of people that have had close-up encounters with Bigfoot. It seems to have a much stronger effect on people. And I don't know if that's just because of conditioning from the time we're little, seeing werewolf movies and such as that, but I know it evokes a much stronger gut reaction in me, personally. I have a picture of one that a fellow researcher took, and it's a really, really good picture. I mean, so good you can see the pupils in its eyes. And no, I am not going to make it public. I've shared it with a few people over the years. You can see the pupils of his eyes. You can see its teeth. You can see its nostrils. You can see the wrinkles in its nose. I cannot look at it without shivers running up and down my back and getting goosebumps all over me. It's just like looking into the face of evil when I look at it. But it was just standing there when the guy got his picture. It was accidental. He didn't know it was there. They were exploring up a creek bottom, and they got to a point that they began to feel just overwhelming dread. And he said it got to the point that he could not make his feet go any further. He could not pick his feet up and put them down to go further up that creek. It was that bad. So he picked up his camera, and this is back in the days of film cameras. He had a good film camera, and he just focused it about 50, 60 feet ahead of him and just started panning and clicking pictures. And then he changed his focus a little bit deeper and then panned back, taking pictures. He sent us a few of these pictures and pointed out where he wanted us to look in the pictures for something that he thought might have been a booger standing there. Well, we looked where he told us, but then we pulled the whole picture up on the screen and got to looking at it, and all of a sudden, boom, there this thing was. It was over on the opposite side from where he was wanting us to look. And it's just standing there. It's just standing there looking at you. And it obviously didn't attack them, but they were totally creeped out. They knew something was there. But to look in his eyes, I'll tell you what, any person that can look at that picture and not get the shivers and the chills does not have a soul. I'll tell you that. If you've got any soul in you at all and you look at that picture, you're going to get the willies. But they scare me a lot more than the regular Bigfoot.
You know, I have yet to run across anyone who didn't say the dogmen were scarier to them than a Bigfoot would be. Bouncing back to the whole LBL topic, you had a law enforcement officer based in that park warn you not to camp out in the northern part of that park. Could you tell us about that?
This is the first time I became aware that something had happened in that park. I was an assistant scoutmaster for years, and I worked with a couple of different troops, and this one troop I had worked with at the time, we were planning on a camping trip to LBL. And over the years, troops that I had been involved with and been a member of as a scout had camped in the land between the lakes a number of times. But I had not been in LBL in years. So a guy that I knew that was a law enforcement officer for the Park Service, and he had been at another national park, and I had heard that he had, a couple of years before, 2 or 3 years before, that he had transferred to the Land Between the Lakes. And this is a guy who, we grew up in the same church together. He had graduated from high school ahead of me, but we had attended the same high school. So I contacted him and told him that, we were planning on bringing our troop up there to the LBL to go camping, and it was asking if he could recommend a good place for us, that would be fun. They have a lot of stuff for the guys to do. He told me, what kind of, you want to do wilderness camping? You want, some little cabins or, little primitive cabins? What are you interested in? And so I told him we were interested in, tent camping and such. And he said, well, if you remember, you can go anywhere you want to go. All you got to do is just check in at the gate when you come in there. But you guys don't need to be doing a bunch of backcountry hiking or camping anywhere north of the elk enclosure. Well, why? Well, there's been some stuff going on up there that, I'm not at liberty to tell you about right now, but I'd suggest, several other places. Well, he told me this, one particular place, and we thought, oh, okay. Well, I said, that looks good. I had an old LBL map, and I found it on the map. So we showed up there, and he actually came by the camp one evening, and we were sitting around the campfire and talking and everything, and most of the guys were gone off somewhere, and I think the other adult leader was somewhere, and I said, so how come you don't want to, what happened, what's going on north of the elk enclosure, how come you don't want us camping up there, or, doing a bunch of backcountry hiking up there? He looked around, and he says, I got involved in the investigation of a guy that got killed up there. I said, really? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, what happened? He walked up on pot growers or something? He said, no. He said, this guy was killed by an animal of some kind. And I said, really? He said, yeah, absolutely. And so I said, tell me about it. So he told me, and he related as how this guy had come up there and he was bow hunting. He had camped, and there was a side road that went off the trace back to the east, and there were some green fields down this road. And he was bow hunting around there, and it was bow season, so it was early fall. Well, he was going to be in there 2 or 3 days and then come home. Well, he didn't come home when he said he was going to, so his wife had called up and said that her husband gone up there bow hunting, and he was supposed to have been home the day before and hadn't shown up. She said that it didn't surprise her when he wasn't home by 10, 11, 12 o'clock, but she said that when he wasn't there by the next morning, she figured something was going on. So what kind of vehicle is he in? She described it. So my friend said that they came in there that morning when he was coming on duty and reported this phone call, and a couple of them said, oh, well, yeah, I've seen that truck. He's parked up there, at this particular road and yada, yada. And then we'll go up there and see what you can find, see if you can find him and see what's going on. So they took off up there. Sure enough, they found his vehicle, right tag number and everything. And, of course, when you go in there, you have to, I think you fill out a little thing, a piece of paper, and you leave it on your dashboard, if I remember right. Anyway, they positively identified it, that it was the guy's vehicle. My friend didn't tell me this, but I have heard since that the windows were busted out in the vehicle. But my friend didn't tell me that. I've heard that from another source since then. But anyway, they go in there and they go into the camp, and the campsite's torn up. And I mean, tent torn to shreds, stuff slung around everywhere, and no sign of the guy. They look around, can't find anything. They bring tracking dogs in and start tracking it. And the dogs are going to the, more or less to the eastward, I think, like east-northeast is the direction they're going. After they've gone a distance, they find a piece of his clothing up in a tree. They find various pieces of his clothing strewn around various places, several of them up in trees, which is unusual. They eventually found his body. very mutilated, laying in a field. I don't know if it was a green field, but it was an opening in the forest of some kind. Of course, he didn't take me there. He did take me, though, and showed me the next day where the guy was camped. Then he got to telling me stories about these werewolf creatures. That's what he called them, these werewolves that lived up in there, supposedly. That was the first time that I ever heard of the other killings that had happened up there that are pretty famous. There's been a lot written about them, where there was a family of 4 that was killed. And he was not there when that happened. That happened some years before he was working there. Now, he told me that once they found the guy's body and the way it was mutilated, he said there were all kind of government people there from different agencies and stuff. And he said that park police were basically there just to sort of control traffic, and that there were just gobs of other people that showed up there. And I said, well, what kind? He said there were some military-looking people. He said there were people that I figured might have been FBI, something else. He said there were. This is before the Men in Black movie, but he said there were secret squirrels that showed up. He said it wasn't just 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. He said there was dozens that came in there, and that basically the park personnel, they were just trying to control traffic and keep them supplied with what they needed to stay in the field, to help them out. But that they were definitely in a subordinate role at that time. Once they found the body, the control of the situation was snatched away from them. Now, some years later, I ran into a person who lives up in that area and still lives in that area. And he actually met with us while we were up there on one of our outings. And the talk came around to some of the incidents that had happened there. And he started talking about the bow hunter that was killed. We started asking him questions and stuff. And I was astounded, absolutely amazed how what he was telling, how it matched what my friend had told me years earlier. More than a decade earlier. I'm talking about actually close to 15 years earlier. That, what my friend had told me. He seemed so intimately familiar with it. I said, do you know where this happened? Do you know where the guy was camped? Could you show us where the campsite was? Well, yeah. Bear and I absolutely didn't tell this guy that I knew where the campsite was, that I'd been there 15 years before. So off we went. And I was absolutely astounded. He took us to the right place. The road there now still goes down to the green fields, but then where it goes on further to the east, over into the area where the guy's body was found, it's not maintained anymore, and it's all washed out now. And he said, boy, at the time, you wouldn't believe this road was worn down slick. There was so many vehicles in and out of here. He said, it was unbelievable the people that came in here. And I said, well, what kind of people? He said, man, it was alphabet soup. He said, you name any agency that goes after weird things, he said, they were here. But the details of what they knew meshed almost perfectly. So I'm totally convinced that story is true because of from 2 completely different sources that didn't know each other, that still don't know each other. And we're looking at this thing from 2 totally different points of view. Now, what he told me about the original killings, that I wouldn't say the original ones, but the more famous ones of where the family of 4 were killed up in the old RV park. He told me a fair amount about that, but again, none of that information was first-hand information because he was not there when it happened. Everything he knew about it was what he had heard from his co-workers that were there and from other people that he had talked to that were natives of the area. and he knew quite a bit about it. And a lot of what he told me meshed pretty good with what, and I think the lady, I can't remember what her name was right off the top of my head. I'm not going to say it because I can't remember for sure what her name is, but there's a pretty famous narrative of what went on during this incident. It doesn't take too many Google searches to find it. You just search under the Beast of LBL and you'll come across it. But what my friend told me meshes pretty good with what that lady wrote. Now, I'll tell you one thing. There's a lot of people talk about an area they call the bunkers. And there are pictures of the bunkers on the internet. And I can tell you 100% for sure that those are not the correct bunkers. The concrete structures that are out in the woods that people say are bunkers are not. I think they're old safe rooms that were left over from houses. They're old root cellar rooms. I know for sure there's one of them out there that has a cistern in it. There's been pictures of it on the internet calling it a bunker. I was taken to the real bunkers, and there are some stories out there that the bunkers were built after that incident where the family of 4 got killed. That's not true. And my friend doesn't believe that, and I don't believe it. He showed them to me, and I think those bunkers were already there, and I think they were probably built as part of some training exercise for maybe a National Guard unit or something that went on out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky or something. But there were bunkers there. Now, if I remember right, there were either 5 or 6 of them, and they were arranged where they had overlapping fields of fire. And they looked like old World War I or World War II pillboxes. They were set down on the ground, and only about 1.5 feet, 2 feet of them stuck up above ground, and they had horizontal gun ports in them. There were steps going down into them, and at one time they had very heavy steel doors on them. I actually saw the things. When my friend took me up there, they were still there. And they were not where the structures are that people call the bunkers nowadays. I have been back to that place multiple times. I was taken there one time by my friend. I went back later on my own, by myself, and I looked at them, and my conclusion is, based on the way they were arranged and everything, that they were arranged in a defensive position. The fronts of them, the gun ports, were pretty much all facing in the same direction. That's why I think they were built there as the training grounds or something. And it's not unusual to find military training facilities on public government property. I can take you to a national forest in a southern state that has absolutely unbelievable training facilities, and even an area where armored vehicles can have live firing exercises, and it's all on national forest public land. So anybody that says, oh, you wouldn't have something like that on Land BL, they don't know what they're talking about. They haven't been around near the government installations that I have. I earned my living on government installations for years, and you would be astounded what's out there. But anyway, back to the story. Another reason I don't think that these bunkers were built after the family of 4 was killed is because if this creature is as smart as I think it is, and as smart as people say that it is, there's no way that you could lure that thing into that area there, coming at it from the correct direction, that it could be exposed to multiple firing points like that. It was too small of an area. And I don't think there's any way that you could have driven it into that area, that you could have chased it in there. I just don't believe it. I think that those bunkers were there for another purpose. Now, the third time I ever went there, they had been in there destroying the bunkers, tearing them out. And I don't think there's any kind of clandestine reason for it. I think it was probably just purely coincidental. Maybe they didn't want people playing in them or something, or maybe they're, I know that snakes would tend to want a den in them. Maybe they were afraid of, somebody getting snake bit, because there's certainly a lot of a lot of poisonous snakes in the area. But the last time I went in there, in the area was gated off. There were gates across the roads where you used to be able to drive right up there nearly all the way to them. Now there's gate across the road, and you have to get out and you have to walk about 150, 200 yards to get in there. But they've all been busted up. All the concrete's been removed. Unless you knew what was there, you wouldn't know what had been there. There's old house debris, and old foundation debris and stuff all over land between the lakes. So there's nothing there that would make you think that anything special was ever there. And I don't think it was anything special. But the area's pretty much been cleaned out. You might call it sanitized, but I don't think there was any reason to sanitize that area. But those were the real bunkers that I got to see back then. And what's there now are not the real bunkers. And I don't think the bunkers had any pivotal role to play in all of that Beast of LBL business at all anyway. So
that family of four incident supposedly involved a family that was camping in an RV, if I remember correctly, in the LBL. Something supposedly had killed that family. The three family members were found inside that camper, if memory serves, but the daughter was found a distance from that RV in a tree. And the remains that were found were pretty grisly. It looked like a wild animal had attacked that family and ripped them apart. Now, as far as that family of four incident compared to the bow hunter incident goes, I do believe wholeheartedly in that bow hunter incident. I heard about that some time ago, and I have yet to hear anything about that incident that makes me skeptical about its authenticity. But I can't say the same thing about that family of four incident, and I'll tell you why. As the story was told, supposedly two police officers that were on scene for that investigation. Those two police officers, when the feds and other law enforcement agents that superseded them arrived, those two police officers were told to leave the scene. If you believe the story, those two police officers drove some distance away from that crime scene and decided to stop at a gas station and talk to the woman who wrote about that incident and brought that incident to public knowledge. Where I find somewhat of a fault with this whole story is it's awfully hard to believe that these two police officers, after having been sworn to silence by the feds before being allowed to leave that area, it's awfully hard for me to believe that they would have gone and told what they had seen and witnessed to the very first person that they came across after leaving the scene of that crime, if it really did happen. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but when you consider that fact, it's hard to believe. If one part of it seems like it might not be true, for me it's kind of hard to believe that the whole story is true. I could be wrong, but that's just how I see it.
Well, like I said, my friend got his information about it second and third hand, and God only knows how many hands. My information I got out of it has been through even more hands. But now reading the story, I've read the story multiple times, and the lady that wrote the story worked in a local grocery store. I think it was an IGA. And supposedly the investigation had been going on for a while. I don't think days and days, but there had been officers there at the crime scene for quite a while. The guys were either sent away or relieved or whatever, and if I remember the story correctly, as it's written, and this can be verified by looking online, that they stopped by the IGA to get something to eat. And I don't know if they had a snack bar in there or a little deli in there or whatever, but they stopped by the IGA, and they were sort of just taking a rest, and they were sitting outside the store. Both of them were in mild shock. They were talking amongst themselves. They were very shaken up. This woman worked there, and she knew everybody in the area. And she was coming or going out of the store and saw them outside there, and they were obviously visibly shaken up. She asked them what was going on. They sort of got to shaking their heads, and in all our years of law enforcement, we've never seen anything this grisly. We've never seen anything like this before. Well, what? I don't know if they didn't tell her then, or I can't remember enough details of the story to tell you this, but you can look it up and read it yourself, or anybody can that's listening to this. Doesn't take much research at all to find it. But eventually the story came out, what had happened. And like you said, the mother was found, if I remember correctly, in the bathroom. The husband, I think he was found right outside, either at the front end or the back end of the RV, and he had a shotgun with him. And it looked like he had gone out to try to confront this thing, and it attacked and killed him outside the RV. There was a boy and a girl, and one of the children was found inside. They were torn to shreds. They were inside the RV, same as the wife was, and the wife and mother. And you are correct, Vic, that the story goes that the other child, and I don't remember if it was the boy or the girl, was up in a tree. They were just horribly mutilated. But there's been a lot of time that's passed since that's happened. Now, I can tell you this. You can still see on old maps where the RV campground was. You can still find the road that goes back in there. I've walked that road. You can still walk back in there, and you can still see the pads where the RVs park. But that RV camping area is closed. It does not exist anymore. And so it is a fact that there was an RV campground there. And it is a fact that it was closed. Now, whether that was a reason or not, there's room for dispute there. I mean, I can show it to you on a map real quick where it is, or where it was.
Yeah, there just might be something to that. Where there's smoke, there's fire in a lot of cases, so maybe there is something to that.
Now, the area that people called the original bunker area, and the reason I think it got drug into all of this was because it was less than a half a mile away to the west from that old RV park, and from where the people were supposedly killed. So it's easy to see why the story was aggrandized and embellished, and why this bunker story got drug into it that you hear about. But I personally think that's bunk, that had absolutely nothing to do with it. If the incident happened as my friend heard about it, and as it's been written about it, and as other people have talked about it, then there was an effort made to eradicate either the one that did it or a bunch of them. I don't know. Who knows? I don't think anybody knows that. At least that'll talk about it. Like I said, I have no idea if they tried to hunt down what they thought was one particular individual, or if it was a group of them. But if it happened, they were unsuccessful in wiping out all the dog men, because, it was supposedly a dog man that killed the bow hunter.
Oh, yeah, they're still there. There's no doubt about that.
I saw dog man tracks, here just a few years ago. So there's still dog men in north part of LBL. So I can tell you that for sure. Now, I believe that there are still dog men in the land between the lakes, certainly in the northern part. I have been out multiple times during daylight hours and at night looking for these things, and there are enough differences in the way they conduct themselves. They don't respond to calls like regular Bigfoot do. They do not reveal themselves as openly sometimes as other Bigfoot do. I have not laid my eyeballs on one. And, I have been blessed with seeing quite a number of type 1 and type 2 Bigfoot, the patty type as well as the southern swamp ape type that we call the type 2. I've seen both kinds on multiple occasions. But I've never laid my eyes on a type 3 or a dog man. I don't want to see one up close. I've had one close to me, but I didn't know it was there. I knew something was there. I just didn't know what it was. It was when I found its tracks the next day that I knew what it was. But I have not laid my eyeballs on one, and I'm not so sure how I would react if I saw one up close. But the consistent thing that I have found in researching them and talking to eyewitnesses is the descriptions are pretty dadgum close. In fact, descriptions are more consistent than they are with regular Bigfoot. And this is over a wide area of the country. You know, I've talked to eyewitnesses in Kentucky, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Alabama. Well, actually, I've talked to one in Arizona as well. And the descriptions are very consistent.
Let's focus on some of these investigations you've done that you just mentioned right there. Would you mind telling us about the encounter that those two deer hunters had?
Actually, that's not my first one. The first one that I had was one that I came across as a result. The deer hunter incident I came across as a result of investigating another one. When I was working for NASA, we had a project going where there was a company in Union Springs, Alabama, that had a contract to build a bunch of new communication equipment for NASA that was going into Marshall Space Flight Center. It was a new PBX system that was going into Marshall's facilities, and it was going to allow us to tie a bunch of phones together into gigantic conference calls, and it was a pretty complicated piece of equipment for 1980s technology. This is in 1984. Union Springs didn't have a motel or anything, so I was staying down in Troy, Alabama, and driving up to Union Springs every day. They had a bunch of very highly skilled people that worked for me there, and they were all very good electronics technicians and such, and very sharp people. I was surprised at the caliber of people that were working at this installation. Anyway, we were working 24 hours a day, and I was in charge of the day shift. We worked from 7 to 7. And we were having a handoff meeting that morning, talking to the night shift guys as they were going off. And there were two ladies that worked for me that were also from Troy, then they rode to work together. They had shown up just a little bit later than usual, and they were obviously very upset. And I could tell that one of them had been crying. I mean, it was very obvious that, her eyes were all red and puffy, and they were both, actually they'd both been crying, but one of them still had, wet tear streaks down her cheeks. And you could tell they were both having a hard time keeping it together. As we're getting the reports from the shift going off, and I'm giving out the work instructions for the day, who's going to be doing what, these ladies were very preoccupied. And they couldn't concentrate on what I was saying, and I knew something was wrong. I figured that they'd either been in a wreck or somebody close to their family had just died, or they had seen a bad wreck, and something really catastrophic and traumatic had happened to them. So as soon as I got done and everybody started to head out onto the shop floor, I said, hey, come here just a second. So we walked in the office, and I shut the door, and I sat down and said, y'all have a seat. I said, what's going on? What's the matter? And they looked looking back and forth at each other, and, well, we'd rather not say. And I said, look, I can't have you out on the floor working on this kind of equipment in the shape that you're in. Do you need to go home and need to take care of some personal business? Well, no. And I said, well, look, you can tell me anything. Anything you tell me is not going to surprise me. And anything you tell me, I'll hold in 100% confidence, and it will not go outside this room unless, without your permission. And nothing you can tell me is gonna blow me out of the water or jeopardize your job unless you tell me that you've been selling plans to the Russians or something, And that got a little bit of a grin out of them, and they said, well, you're not going to believe this, we saw a werewolf on the way to work this morning. I said, you did, really? And yeah. And so I revealed to them, that I believed in Bigfoot and that I'd heard people talk about werewolves and invested a lot of time in investigating Bigfoot. That opened them up a lot more. They were willing to talk about it. And they said that they were coming to work, and they were a few miles outside of Troy, Alabama, going to the northeast on U.S. Highway 29. And there's a section along through there where the road's got a lot of curves in it. They said they had just come out of one curve, a long left-hand curve, and the road straightens out for just a very short distance, and it starts to curve back to the right. There's a creek bottom that's down on the east side, which would be to the right side of the road. And they said that as they came around and as they saw the sign for the next curve, there was a big yellow sign there, with a right-hand curve arrow on it. They said all of a sudden they saw that there was this creature had just stepped up onto the bank, up onto the shoulder of the road where the sign was, right there beside the sign, and stopped. They saw it, and the lady didn't really slam on her brakes or anything like that right at first. She took her foot up off the gas. Then she thought it was going to come across the road in front of her, so she did stand on the brakes. They said the thing was looking right at them. And the lady that was in the passenger side said that she made eye contact with it, and the lady that was driving sort of freaked, and she didn't lift her foot up off the brake, so they rolled past it doing probably, it's curvy right there, so she said they weren't doing over 45 to 50 to begin with. As they rolled past it, she said they were probably doing less than 20 miles an hour, like 15 to 20. It was standing there beside that road sign, almost like it was leaning on it. It was so close to it. The lady in the passenger side, she said that they locked eyeballs, that she and the creature locked eyeballs, and she said it was the most evil, malevolent thing that she had ever experienced, and she said she literally felt like the thing was trying to suck her soul out of her body, is the way she described it. It completely, totally unnerved her, and I've got chilly bumps on me just telling the story. She said that she has never, ever been so frightened in her life. She thought it was going to somehow pull her essence out of her body right through the car windows. She said it turned its head and looked at her as she rolled by it, looking directly at her, directly in her eyes. The other lady was looking at it as long as they could, and she said once they got past it, suddenly the lady driving sort of snapped out of it, and she stomped on the gas and took off. Neither one of them looked back. They just wanted to get the hell out of there. And as they got going down the road and they realized what they had seen, they started just getting more and more upset. And by the time they got to work there in Union Springs, both of them were just wrecks. So I told them that they could take off if they wanted to. They could have the day off, whatever it took. If they want to go uptown and get a cup of coffee, it's okay. I told them, I live in Troy, and I'm staying in Troy. I would really love it if you would show me this afternoon when we get off work, where this happened. I'd really like to see it because, there was still enough daylight after we got off work to get down there where they could show me where this happened. And they said they would be glad to show me. In fact, they would love to show me where it happened. They were a lot better after talking about it and finding somebody that, that believed them. So that afternoon, we took off down there, and they took me right to the place. We pulled off the highway there, and I was able to, how high is relation to the top of the sign here? Where was its head? How high was it? I had a tape measure with me in my truck, and I got it out, and I measured up. The thing was about 9 feet tall. Both of them agreed on it totally, on how tall it was. It was about 9 feet. I asked them a lot of questions about, well, what did it look like? They said that they could tell it had fangs. I said, well, were you seeing the upper fangs, or lower fangs, or were they like tusks like on a wild boar or whatever? Well, they decided that after sort of talking it through that they could see uppers and lowers sticking out of its snout. They said it had a dog-like black nose on the end of it. I said, how big was the snout? I said, was it a long snout like a German Shepherd, or was it like a boxer? No. It was not as big as a German Shepherd, not that long. They described it as more baboon-like. And I asked about the fur, and they said it was sort of charcoal gray colored fur all over. The description of the hair on it and everything was very, very similar to the descriptions that you get of Bigfoot. One of the ladies mentioned the reason she said it was almost like it was leaning on the signpost. It had one of its hands wrapped around the signpost. She said that she thought she saw claws on its fingers, but she wasn't sure. And the other lady, the lady that was driving, also said it had its hand on the signpost, but she didn't notice if it had claws or fingernails or what. And I asked, did it have ears? Oh yeah, it had ears. Did it have ears like a person? No. It had like dog's ears. And I said, oh, like a German Shepherd or something? No, not that big. And I said, well, like a lab? No, they didn't hang down, And one of the ladies said, well, it looks sort of like Spock's ears. Spock on Star Trek? I said, oh yeah, I love Star Trek, yeah. Well, sort of like that, sort of like his ears, but longer, bigger. But they were pointed, and she said, yeah. I said, well, we're sort of like a Doberman Pinscher's ears. And both of them, yeah, that's it, like a Doberman Pinscher's ears. And I said, okay. They gave me a pretty good description of the thing. But the lady who was in the passenger seat, she kept talking about its eyes, how its eyes just bored into her, that they just bored right into her soul. Her biggest impression was its eyes, and how evil it looked and how evil it felt to her, the evil presence that she felt from the thing. They didn't want to hang around there very long because it was getting dusky dark by this time, so they left. Well, I started looking around, and I could see while they were there, I could see where something had walked up from the creek bottom. I could see, something had walked through the grass there on the shoulder of the road and come up there by the sign. Since that's the direction they said it was coming, and they said it looked like it was going to cross the road, but it just stopped there by the road sign when their car came around the curve. And that's why the lady had put her foot on the brake to begin with, is because she thought it was going to step out in front of her. I said, did you look in the rearview mirror? Did it go on and cross the road after you passed it? We don't know. We didn't look. I don't know. I don't care. We just wanted out of there. So after they left, I went across the road. There's a very steep dirt bank there. Not a rock bank. It's not blasted through rock. It's cut through dirt. Clay deposits, and maybe there's some little bit of rock in it, but it's mostly just dirt right there. This bank is. Right there, it was 13 feet high. From the bottom of the shoulder to the top of the bank was right at 13 feet. About head high on me, right at 6 feet off the ground. In fact, I measured it was 6 feet up. I found a track. And what I found was, I could tell it was the ball of the foot, and there were 5 toes, not 4, there were 5, but they were very distinct claws, and they looked like pretty good-sized claws. The claws looked like they were probably a good 1.25 to 1.5 inches long, and on each toe. Oh, I also found at the bottom of the bank where it had kicked off. There was sort of a scuff, but I could tell where its claws had dug into the ground there. And its next foot hit, like I said, was about 6 feet up. I stood back looking up the bank, and this bank was at about, I'd say, guesstimate, at about an angle 10 to 15 degrees off vertical. So from the horizontal, this bank is up at about a 75 to 80 degree angle, something like that. I'd say somewhere between 70 and 80 degrees. All right, I looked and I could see another track up just below the top, just below the lip of the bank. So I went around and got up there. By this time, it was beginning to get a little bit dusk on me, so I took a flashlight with me just in case. I didn't need it. I found where the track was, and I looked at it from the top down, and again, it looked just like the other one, except I could tell it was the opposite foot. And I think the first one was the left foot that I'd found there about head high, and the second one was the right foot, if I remember correctly. And it looked just the same as the first track, 5 toes and, prominent claws. I looked all over the lip of the bank there, the top of the bank there on the hill. I found nothing. I found no further tracks at all. I did find one place where I could tell the grass was mashed down, and I found a broken limb. And it wasn't a broken limb that had been grabbed and twisted. It was just had been incidentally broken as the thing went into the woods there, headed, roughly westward. So I was really, really, really impressed with how it had scaled that bank in 2 steps. That really impressed me. The fact that a 9-foot animal could scale that bank. By the way, back to the description of the animal, I asked them what they think it weighed. Both of them said over 500 pounds.
Ooh.
Yeah. And they described it as very muscled, that you could see the muscles under its hair. They said the muscles were very highly defined. It was very athletically built. Now, they didn't describe the gigantic, humongous shoulders like a lot of people describe on Bigfoot, but they said that it had very highly defined muscles all over it in its arms and legs and chest. Now, when they saw it, it was not totally bright daylight yet. This would have been at about 6:15-ish, something like this, in the morning when they saw it. In fact, the lady said she still had her headlights on, but she said she didn't really need them. She kept